Have you ever wondered if the prayers of one man could change history? Could the voice of a coal miner's son echo louder than Hitler's armies? This is the story of Rees Howells, a man trained by surrender, a man tested by fire, a man whose hidden prayers bent nations. Rees was born on October 10, 1879. He came from Brynamon, a small village in South Wales. He was the sixth of 11 children. His father worked in the coal mines. The family was poor. Survival was hard. There was food some days, and hunger on others. The valleys were filled with chapels. Hymns echoed across the hills. But for young Rees, faith was routine. It was tradition. It was duty. It was not yet power. At 12, he entered the mines with his father. The air was thick with dust. The ground trembled from shifting rock. Explosions killed men often. Collapses buried others alive. Miners left home never sure if they would return. Rees saw it all. The danger, the poverty, the fear. But deep inside, he longed for something greater. At 22, Rees left for America. He wanted a new life. He worked in the steel mills. The work was brutal. The hours were long. But the pay was better than Wales. Rees began saving money. He dreamed of a future. But money did not bring peace. Success could not satisfy. Inside, he felt restless, empty, hungry. His roommate was a Christian. Every day, the man prayed. Sometimes Rees heard his own name in those prayers. Conviction pierced him. He resisted, but the Spirit pressed harder. Back in Wales, he saw a man named Maurice Rees. This man had been transformed by Christ. Once a drunk, now a saint. The difference was undeniable. If God can do that for him, Rees thought, why not me? It was in a chapel meeting that everything changed. The presence of God fell. Rees broke. He wept. He confessed his sin. He surrendered his life to Jesus Christ. In that moment, he was reborn. But salvation was only the beginning. God had a school prepared for him, the school of the Spirit. Soon after, Rees felt the Spirit speak. Are you willing to be a fool for me? The word struck like fire. To be a fool meant no wages, no reputation, no security. It meant ridicule. It meant being misunderstood. Rees wrestled. He hesitated. Could he give up everything? Days passed. Finally, he surrendered. Lord, I am willing. The tests came quickly. One day, he met a beggar with no shoes. His own shoes were his last pair. He had no money for another. The Spirit whispered, what would Jesus do? Rees hesitated. His pride resisted. Then he obeyed. He gave away his shoes. He walked home barefoot. His feet bled on the cobblestones, but his heart burned with fire. Later he said, when I lost my shoes, I gained heaven's authority. Would you have given away your last pair of shoes? From then on, obedience defined his life. He lived by faith alone. When food ran out, provision came. When bills were due, God supplied. He never begged. He never asked men. He trusted only God, and God never failed him. During this season, he met Elizabeth Hannah. She loved Christ deeply. They fell in love. But then God called Rees to Africa. Elizabeth struggled. Could she leave her home, her family, her country? After prayer, she wept. Then she said, Rees, I am willing. Together they married. Together they sailed for Africa. The voyage was long. The mission was harder. South Africa in the early 1900s was a land of division, racial barriers, colonial tensions, spiritual darkness. Rees and Elizabeth had no wealth, no strong organization behind them, only faith. But prayer was their weapon. They prayed for villages. Entire tribes opened to the gospel. They prayed for the sick. Healings broke out. They prayed for the bound. Demons fled. Revival fires began to spark. But Africa was also a place of cost. Rees nearly died of malaria. Elizabeth grew weak with exhaustion. They buried close friends in African soil. Grief was heavy. Poverty pressed them. At times, they had little to eat. They lived with almost nothing. When they finally returned to Wales, they owned very little. No property, no savings, just their son, Samuel, and a few belongings. But they carried something greater. The lessons of intercession, the fire of faith. Back in Wales, God gave them a new assignment. Not Africa, but the nations. Not through travel, but through training. In 1924, they opened the Bible College of Wales. They had no patron, no support, no money, only faith. But faith was enough. A property became available in Swansea. They prayed. God provided. Furniture came through prayer. Food came through prayer. Teachers came through prayer. Every need was met. Every answer came at the throne. The college was different. It was not about lectures. It was not about degrees. It was about the Spirit. Students were taught to live debt-free, to depend on God alone, to fast, to intercede, to obey immediately. Faith was not theory. It was a way of life. At the center of the college was the Blue Room, a small chamber of prayer. Here, intercessions were written. Here, victories were recorded. The Blue Room became their war room. Nations were carried before God. Students groaned in prayer. They travailed until peace came. The Blue Room would become famous in heaven, for it was here that battles were won. The 1930s grew darker. Hitler rose in Germany. Austria fell. Czechoslovakia fell. Nations trembled. Britain feared war. Rees told the students, the destiny of nations will be decided here, not in parliaments. He said, we are soldiers now. Prayer is our battlefield. The students prayed daily. They prayed for Britain. They prayed for Churchill. They prayed for missionaries trapped abroad. They prayed for the defeat of Hitler's plans. Sometimes they prayed all night. Sometimes they fasted. Sometimes the Spirit pressed them until they groaned like soldiers in trenches. Rees called it praying through. It meant not stopping until the answer came. It meant traveling until victory was birthed. It meant fighting unseen battles as if they were on the front lines. Rees told them, the intercessor must bear the pain as if he were there. And soon, their prayers would collide with the greatest crisis of the century. The year was 1939. Germany invaded Poland. Britain declared war. The world braced for another great conflict. Fear gripped the nation. Bomb shelters were built. Children were evacuated from cities. Families wept as sons went to the front. But in Swansea, something else stirred. The Bible College of Wales had become a barracks of prayer. Rees told the students, we are enlisted now. The Holy Spirit is our commander. The world fights with guns. We will fight with prayer. They began to meet daily, sometimes 3 times a day, sometimes through the night. They prayed until sweat poured. They prayed until they wept. They prayed until groans filled the room, like the cries of soldiers in trenches. Rees often reminded them, we must pray as if we ourselves are on the battlefield. He believed intercession was identification. To pray for soldiers, you must feel their fear. To pray for nations, you must bear their burden. This was not light prayer. This was warfare. Hitler seemed unstoppable. In months, he overran Norway, Denmark, Belgium, the Netherlands. By May 1940, France collapsed. British forces were trapped. The world expected disaster. 400,000 men were stranded on the beaches of Dunkirk. German tanks were advancing. German planes filled the skies. Churchill feared the army would be lost. If that happened, Britain would fall next. In the Blue Room, Rees and the students travailed. They pleaded with God for a miracle. They refused to stop. They prayed day and night. Rees said, we must press until the answer comes. And then the miracle happened. The weather shifted. Storms grounded German planes. Hitler inexplicably ordered his tanks to halt. Civilian boats crossed the channel. Fishermen, merchants, even pleasure yachts. They rescued soldiers one by one. When the final count was made, 338,000 men had escaped. Churchill called it a miracle. Historians still call it a miracle. But in Swansea, they called it the fruit of prayer. Do you believe prayer could still rescue nations today? The victory at Dunkirk was only the beginning. The war raged on. London was bombed. Coventry burned. Cities were reduced to rubble. Thousands died. But in the Blue Room, prayer continued. Rees believed God gave them prophetic assignments. Sometimes they prayed for Winston Churchill. Sometimes they prayed for nations already under Nazi control. Sometimes they prayed against Hitler's next move before it happened. One day, Rees felt pressed to intercede for Britain itself. The Nazis were preparing to invade. The code name was Operation Sea Lion. Troops gathered along the French coast. Ships were readied, but Rees declared, "The Spirit will raise a storm. The invasion will not succeed." That week, fierce storms struck the channel. The invasion was canceled. History books record weather as the reason, but in the Blue Room, they knew it was answered prayer. Another time, Rees led the college to pray for Russia. This was shocking. Russia was communist. It was against the gospel, but Rees believed God would use Russia to stall Hitler. In 1941, Hitler turned on Russia. His forces advanced rapidly, but then winter came, one of the harshest in history. German armies froze. The tide of war shifted. Rees said, "God has answered." For 6 years, they prayed through every phase of the war. The Battle of Britain, the Blitz, the North African Campaign, the invasion of Italy, D-Day in 1944. At each stage, the Blue Room pressed until victory was won in prayer. Rees taught his students, "We are soldiers. Our post is the place of intercession. Our weapon is prayer. We do not retreat until heaven gives the victory." The toll was heavy. Rees aged rapidly. His hair turned white. His body grew weak. But his spirit burned. He said, "The world will never know what battles are fought here. But heaven records every cry." Visitors to the college said the atmosphere was electric. The Blue Room carried the weight of nations. Sometimes they entered and felt silence so heavy they could barely breathe. Other times, they heard groans, cries, and even shouts of victory. It was like standing in the middle of a battlefield. The students were marked for life. Many later said, "We learned more in those prayer battles than in any lecture." Some became missionaries, others pastors, others teachers, but all carried the mark of intercession. By 1945, the tide had turned. Germany retreated. Allied forces advanced. Victory was near. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Nations rejoiced. Church bells rang across Britain. Crowds filled the streets. At the Bible College of Wales, there was no parade, no shouting, no boasting, just thanksgiving. They knew their prayers had been part of the battle. Rees told his students, "The real victory was won on our knees." Let me ask you, do you believe history is still shaped more by politics or by prayer? After the war, the college continued to pray. But the world was different now. Cities were in ruins. Millions were dead. The Cold War was beginning. Communism spread. Nations trembled again. Rees believed the next great battle was not political. It was spiritual. He told his students, "Now begins the greater work. We must prepare the nations for revival." The Blue Room was filled with new petitions. Prayers for Asia, for Africa, for South America, for missionaries who carried the gospel, for nations close to Christ. Reports began to come. Missionaries wrote letters of breakthroughs, villages turning to Christ, healing meetings, unreached tribes opening their hearts. Rees knew prayer was still winning battles. The college became a hub for training. Students learned to depend entirely on God, to live without debt, to pray until heaven answered, to obey instantly. Rees often told them, "Faith is not believing God can. Faith is knowing God will." The Blue Room became legendary, not because of its size. It was a small chamber, but because of the battles fought there. Every prayer was logged, every victory recorded. It was like a war journal of heaven. Even today, the Blue Room is remembered. Historians call it one of the greatest centers of prayer in modern times. Rees himself called it his altar. He said, "This room is where heaven and earth meet." Dear family, more than half of you who watch these documentaries are not yet subscribed. You are our brothers and sisters in Christ, part of the same body, called to the same mission. By subscribing, you're not just following a channel, you're helping us preach the gospel, share these untold revival stories, and stand together in fulfilling the Great Commission. So click subscribe, ring the bell, and join us on this journey as we uncover the struggles and triumphs of God's generals. Together, we carry the fire forward. Students went out with fire, some to Africa, some to Asia, some to the darkest corners of Europe. They carried no wealth, no fame, but they carried the power of intercession. Rees began to pour into his son, Samuel. He wanted the vision to continue. Samuel had grown up in the atmosphere of prayer. He had seen his father groan in travail. He had heard the cries of intercession deep into the night. He knew the cost. He knew the weight. Rees told him, "This is not an institution. This is an altar. Guard it. Keep the fire burning." But the years of battle had taken their toll. Rees's body was weak. He had spent himself in prayer, fasting, traveling, groaning for nations. Every ounce of strength had been poured out. By the late 1940s, he was frail. Students noticed. His hair was white. His frame was thin. But his eyes still burned with fire. His voice still carried authority. When he spoke, the room fell silent. When he prayed, heaven opened. In one of his final addresses, he said, "The vision does not end with me. The intercession must continue. The nations must hear the gospel. Revival must come before the Lord returns." On February 13th, 1950, Rees Howells passed into glory. He died quietly. There were no headlines, no national announcements, no parades. But in heaven, a general came home. The sound of his prayers still echoed. The record of his intercessions was still fresh before God. The man who gave his shoes away, the man who prayed through wars, the man who bent nations, now entered his eternal reward. His legacy did not end. The Bible College of Wales continued. Under Samuel's leadership, the Blue Room remained active. Students still prayed. Missionaries were still sent. Nations were still touched. Even decades later, people spoke of Rees's life. Some called him a prophet of intercession. Others called him a general of prayer. His methods were simple, but his surrender was complete. What were his secrets? First, total surrender. Rees held nothing back. His money, his comfort, his pride, even his shoes. He gave it all. He said, "When God has all of you, He can trust you with all of Himself." Second, identification. Rees believed intercession meant entering another's burden. He prayed for nations as if he lived there. He prayed for soldiers as if he fought with them. He prayed for the lost as if he himself were lost. This made prayer real. This made prayer powerful. Third, obedience. Rees obeyed instantly. If God said give, he gave. If God said go, he went. If God said wait, he waited. He often said, "Delayed obedience is disobedience." Fourth, faith. He never asked men for money. He never begged. He trusted only God. The college ran for years without debt. Every need met by prayer. Rees said, "Faith is not believing God can. Faith is knowing God will." Fifth, prayer for nations. Rees believed prayer could shape history. Not just families, not just churches, but entire nations. At Dunkirk, 338,000 men were saved. At Britain's coast, storms blocked Hitler. In Russia, winter froze the German army. These were not coincidences. They were answers. Do you believe prayer can still shape governments and world events today? Lastly, the secret place. Rees knew revival begins within, in hidden prayer, in private surrender, before it bursts into public fire. He said, "If revival does not come first to your own heart, it will never spread to your nation." This is his legacy. Not wealth, not fame, but prayer. Hidden, persistent, powerful. The kind of prayer that shifts history. Today, the Blue Room still stands. People visit from around the world. They say the atmosphere still carries weight, still carries presence, still carries history. The prayers of Rees Howells linger like a fragrance that has never left. His story continues to inspire. Books have been written. Preachers still tell his story. Intercessors still look to his example, because the world still needs men and women like him. So let us ask ourselves, what about us? Would we surrender like Rees? Would we pray until nations are shaken? Would we obey even when it costs us? Which part of his life challenges you most? his surrender, his intercession, or his faith. The world is changing fast. Nations are restless. Wars still rage. Governments rise and fall. But God is still looking for intercessors. Hidden men and women, unknown to history, but famous in heaven. Rees Howells proved it. One praying life can touch the world. Your prayers can reach further than your feet. Your intercession can outlive your years. Your surrender can shift nations. If you believe hidden prayer can still change nations, write "I believe" in the comments. This is the story of Rees Howells, a coal miner's son, a missionary, a teacher, a general of prayer, a man who walked with God. And perhaps his story is a call, not just to admire him, but to follow his path. Because maybe the next intercessor God is looking for is you. If this story stirred your heart, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to Fire Trail Revival Stories. Like this video if you believe prayer still changes nations. Tell us in the comments who you want to see next, John Hyde, Smith Wigglesworth, or Catherine Coleman. And watch the next documentary right here, because the greatest battles are still being fought, not with armies, but with intercessors. Maybe the next intercessor God is calling is you.